before the gavel even struck, Pam Bondi knew something was wrong. Judge Edward Langston's eyes locked onto hers with a glint that promised more than just a routine ruling. She'd seen that look before, but never in a case this small, never over something as petty as a $10,000 fine. What was he hiding? Pam Bondi strode into courtroom 3B at the Tampa courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished floor, with the confidence of a woman who'd spent decades dismantling tougher opponents than this. A lawyer forged in the fires of Hillsborough County as a prosecutor, she'd built her name taking down drug rings and human traffickers, cases that made headlines, not footnotes. Born in Tampa in 1965, she'd clawed her way through the University of Florida and Stetson Law, earning every shred of her reputation. Now, freshly sworn in as the U.S. Attorney General after a bruising confirmation fight, she was back in her hometown, handling a local dispute over a building code violation. It was a favor to an old friend, a chance to flex her muscle and remind everyone she hadn't gone soft in Washington. The fine was chump change compared to the battle she'd fought. Like the Martin Anderson case in 2007, where she'd prosecuted guards for a teen's death, or the Trump University mess in 2013 that still dogged her name. This was supposed to be a walk in the park. She settled at the defendant's table, smoothing her navy blazer, her posture relaxed but alert. The case was straightforward. A municipal regulation snag, a slap-on-the-wrist penalty for some overlooked permit. She'd handled dozens of these as Florida's Attorney General, from 2011 to 2019, cutting through bureaucratic nonsense with a prosecutor's precision. 10 minutes, tops. That's what she'd told her aide. She flipped through her notes, barely glancing at them. She didn't need to. Her mind was a steel trap, honed by years of staring down killers and con men. Across from her, the city's attorney fumbled with his tie, a nervous tic she'd seen in greener lawyers. He didn't matter. This was her room, her turf. Then the door swung open, and Judge Edward Langston stepped in. Pam's gut tightened. She knew him. Everyone in Tampa's legal circles did. A hardliner with a reputation for chewing up attorneys who didn't kiss the ring, Langston had once trashed her on Fox News during her AG days, calling her a political climber with no spine. She'd shrugged it off then, public jabs came with the territory. But now, watching him climb the bench with that stone-cold stare, she felt the air shift. He wasn't here to play nice. His gray suit hung sharp on his frame and his hands gripped the edge of the bench like he owned the place. No nod, no pleasantries, just a predator sizing up prey. "Let's get started," Langston said, his voice flat but edged with something Pam couldn't quite place. She straightened, her instincts kicking in. Judges usually took a beat to shuffle papers, scan files, settle in. Not Langston. He dove straight into the deep end. The courts reviewed the matter. The defendant's in violation of Municipal Code 17C. Fines $10,000 payable immediately. The words hit like a sucker punch. Pam's brow twitched, but she kept her face neutral. No preamble, no arguments, just a ruling out of nowhere. She'd expected a discussion, maybe a warning, not a summary judgment dropped like a guillotine. The city attorney smirked, leaning back in his chair as if he'd known it was coming. Pam's mind raced. This wasn't right. She'd seen ambushes before. Hell, she'd sprung a few herself as a prosecutor. But this felt personal. Langston wasn't just ruling, he was flexing. "Your Honor," she said, her tone steady as steel. "With all due respect, we haven't even opened proceedings. I haven't presented my position." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent years breaking down liars in cross-examinations. She wasn't rattled, not yet, but the hairs on her neck stood up. Something was off, and she intended to find out what. Langston didn't blink. "Your position's irrelevant, Miss Bondi. The code's clear, you broke it." His lips curled slightly, a sneer masquerading as a smile. "Or do you think your fancy title gets you a free pass?" The jab stung, but Pam didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, from cartel lawyers, from grieving families, from pundits who'd painted her as Trump's lapdog after that university debacle. She folded her hands, meeting his gaze head-on. "If the code's that clear, we wouldn't be here. I'd like the chance to speak." He leaned back, his fingers drumming the bench. "Go ahead then, waste our time. It won't change a thing." The challenge hung in the air, thick and deliberate. Pam caught the glint in his eye again. Smug, calculated. This wasn't about a fine. It was about her. She'd walked into courtroom 3B expecting a formality, but Langston had other plans, and whatever game he was playing, she wasn't about to let him win without a fight. She adjusted her notes, more for effect than need. She didn't need paper to take him apart. She'd done it with less against bigger sharks. Langston thought he had the upper hand, but Pam Bondi hadn't survived drug lords and political hit jobs by folding early. Whatever he was hiding, she'd drag it into the light. The real trial was just beginning. Pam Bondi sat rigid, her hands clasped tight, as Judge Edward Langston's words sliced through the air like a blade. "Violation's clear, Miss Bondi. 10 grand. Due now. Court's done." His voice carried a venom that made it obvious this wasn't just a ruling, it was a slap. She opened her mouth to respond, but he cut her off, leaning forward with a smirk. Oh, don't look so shocked, Tampa's self-appointed hero. Thought you'd waltz in here and dazzle us with that DC shine. The jab hit low, a dig at her prosecutor days and her defense of Trump in 2020. Pam's jaw tightened, but she didn't blink. She'd faced worse. Cartel lawyers spitting in her face, grieving mothers cursing her name. This was nothing. Yet the venom in Langston's tone told her it wasn't about the fine. It was about her. Across the room, Michael Grayson, the city attorney, snickered, his fingers tapping his briefcase like he'd just won the lottery. She knew him, a sore loser from a drug case she'd crushed him in years back. He'd never gotten over it. "Your Honor," Pam said, her voice calm but edged, "you haven't heard a word from me. No evidence, no arguments, just a fine out of thin air. That's not procedure. That's a vendetta." She locked eyes with Langston, daring him to deny it. He snorted, waving a hand. "Procedure? Spare me. You broke the code, end of story. Or do you think your badge lets you rewrite the rules?" His sneer deepened. "Guess that's what happens when you spend too long playing savior, busting dope dealers, kissing up to billionaires. You forget how the little people play." Pam's pulse quickened, but her face stayed stone. He was baiting her, dragging up her past like it was Exhibit A. She'd spent years in Hillsborough County, locking up traffickers, sure, but that billionaires line was a cheap shot at the Trump University mess. She hadn't forgotten the headlines. $25,000 from Trump's fund to her campaign. Then her office dropping the probe in 2013. It was legal, but it stank, and Langston knew it. Before she could fire back, Grayson jumped in, his voice oily and loud. "She's good at forgetting, Judge. Like how she forgot to investigate Trump U after pocketing his cash. What was it, $25K to look the other way? Bet she's hoping we'll do the same here." He grinned, leaning back. "Old habits, right, Pam? Buy a ruling. Call it justice." The room went still, the accusation hanging like smoke. Pam's fingers twitched against her notes, but she didn't flinch. Grayson wanted her to snap. He'd always been a punk, throwing tantrums when she outmaneuvered him. She turned to him, her gaze cold. "You're still crying about that bust from 9, Michael? I didn't buy anything then, and I'm not buying your garbage now. Stick to the case." Grayson's smirk faltered, but Langston pounced. "Enough chit-chat. You've got no case, Miss Bondi. This is a courtroom, not a soapbox for your ego. Fine stands, pay up or appeal. I don't care." He folded his arms, smug as hell. "Unless you've got something worth hearing, which I doubt." Pam exhaled slow, her mind already 3 steps ahead. He was shutting her down, hard, but she'd seen judges pull this before. Bully first, reason later. She leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "You doubt me? Fine. But I doubt this court's got a shred of evidence to back that fine. Where's the report? The inspector's log? You're running on fumes, Your Honor, and we both know it." Langston's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation breaking his mask. "You're fishing, Bondi. The city says you violated 17C. That's enough for me. You don't get to grill me. I'm the judge here." "Funny," Pam shot back. "I thought judges ruled on facts, not feelings. Or did I miss the memo where you get to play king and skip the law?" Her tone stayed even, but the barb landed. She saw it in the way his jaw clenched. Grayson piped up again, desperate to reclaim the spotlight. "She's stalling, Judge. Same trick she pulled with Trump. Dodge the heat, spin the story. Maybe she's got another donor lined up to bail her out," he chuckled, glancing at Langston for approval. Pam ignored him, keeping her focus on Langston. Call it what you want, but I'm entitled to a defense. You're not a dictator, yet. Let me speak, or this ruling won't hold water anywhere. Langston slammed a hand on the bench, his voice rising. You're entitled to squat unless I say so. This isn't your playground, Bondi. It's my court. You want to talk? Make it quick, or I'll tack on contempt and watch you squirm. The threat hung heavy, but Pam didn't budge. She'd stared down bigger bullies. Langston was just louder. His contempt charge was a bluff. He wouldn't risk the paperwork. She smiled faintly, letting the silence stretch. Contempt? Go ahead. I'll appeal that too. But you're not dodging my question. Where's the proof? Langston glared, his fingers curling into fists. You're a real piece of work, you know that? Fine. Say your piece. It's a circus anyway. He sat back, arms crossed, daring her to fail. Pam nodded once, her mind racing. They thought they had her cornered, but she'd cracked tougher nuts. Langston's scorn and Grayson's cheap shots were fuel. She'd use every word against them. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Pam Bondi leaned into the fight, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade honed from years as a prosecutor. Let's talk law, Your Honor. Henderson v. City of St. Petersburg, 2018. Ring a bell? That case shredded your precious 17. See, higher courts called it vague, unenforceable garbage. So tell me, how's it holding up your fine today? Langston's face darkened, his fingers gripping the bench. Don't lecture me, Bondi. That's a stretch. Different facts, different ruling. You're grasping at straws. Grasping? Pam shot back, her tone icy. I'm citing precedent. Something you'd know if you bothered with the books instead of playing dictator. Henderson ruled the code's too murky to stick without hard proof. Where's yours? Or are we just trusting your gut now? Langston barked a laugh, bitter and loud. My gut's got more sense than your tricks, Ms. U.S. Attorney General. You think waiving some old case scares me? This is my court. I say what flies. Pam didn't flinch. She'd faced down killers in the Martin Anderson case, staring at guards who'd beaten a kid to death and never blinked. Langston's bluster was child's play. Your court? Sure, but not your sandbox. The law's not your toy. Prove the violation or drop the fine. Before Langston could snap back, Michael Grayson leapt in, his voice dripping with venom. She's deflecting, Judge. Same old. Pam dodges the dirt, hides behind fancy words. Bet she's got a donor on speed dial to clean this up too. Pam turned on him, eyes blazing. Keep flapping, Grayson. You're still sore I smoked you in 9. Your client's rotting in Rayford because of me. This isn't about donors. It's about you two botching a case you can't back up. Langston slammed his gavel, the crack echoing. Enough. You're done, Bondi. I've heard your whining. Fine stands. Cry to the appeals court if you want. Whining? Pam's voice sharpened. I'm asking for evidence. Something you've dodged 3 times now. What's the game, Langston? This isn't justice, it's a setup. He smirked, leaning forward. Call it what you want. You're out of moves, hotshot. Pay or get out. The air thickened with his arrogance, but then the chamber door swung open. Judge Sarah Mitchell strode in, her presence a thunderclap. A senior judge with steel in her spine, she'd backed Pam's run for Florida AG years ago, a rare ally in a brutal campaign. Langston froze mid-sneer as Mitchell climbed the bench beside him, her gaze piercing. What's this? Langston sputtered. You've got no business here, Sarah. Mitchell's voice was cold, clipped. I do when I hear a Tampa courtroom's turning into a circus. I'm supervising, Edward. Explain this mess now. Pam seized the opening. Glad you're here, Your Honor. Langston's ramming through a $10,000 fine with no evidence, no hearing. Smells like a grudge to me. Langston's face reddened. Grudge? She's delusional. The code's clear. She broke it. End of story. Mitchell raised a hand, silencing him. Clear? Then why's she citing Henderson and you're dodging it? I read that file. 17 Gimshe's a legal train wreck. Where's your proof, Edward? He bristled, voice rising. Proof's with the city. Grayson's got it. She's just stalling. Pam pounced. Grayson's got nothing. I've asked 4 times for a shred of paper. They're bluffing, and you're rubber stamping it. Why's that, Judge? You two buddies off the clock? Grayson shot up, nearly shouting. That's slander. She's dragging us through the mud because she's losing. Typical Bondi leans on cronies like Mitchell when the heat's on. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Grayson. I'm no one's crony. I'm here because someone tipped me off about bias. Edward, you and Michael go way back. Golf buddies, campaign donors. Care to explain why you're tag-teaming Pam? Langston's jaw dropped, then snapped shut. That's nonsense. I rule fair, always have. She's spinning lies to save her skin. Fair, Pam cut in, her voice a whip. You've stonewalled me from the jump, and Grayson's practically drooling to stick it to me. This isn't a ruling, it's revenge. What'd I do to you two, huh? Beat you too bad last time? Grayson sneered. You're paranoid, Pam. Maybe it's guilt. Trump's money didn't buy you enough friends. Now you're pulling strings with Mitchell to wiggle out. Mitchell slammed her hand on the bench, her tone lethal. Enough, both of you! Grayson, one more outburst and you're in contempt. Edward, you're on thin ice. I've got records of you two dining together last month. This stinks. Pam, make your case. Cleanly. Pam nodded, her pulse steady despite the chaos. 17, sees dead in the water. Henderson gutted it, no evidence, no fine. Langston's banking on intimidation, not law. Check Grayson's file, it's empty. They're cooked. Langston exploded. Cooked! You're a fraud, Bondi. Hiding behind Mitchell won't save you. I'll bury this case, and you with it. Mitchell's voice sliced through. You'll bury nothing, Edward. I'm calling a recess. 10 minutes. You and Grayson better dig up something real or this ends now. Pam, hold your fire. I want facts, not fireworks. Langston glared, his fists clenched, while Grayson muttered curses under his breath. Pam sat back, her mind racing. Mitchell's arrival had cracked their wall, but the venom in Langston's eyes screamed trouble. She'd exposed their game. Now they'd come harder. She'd fought dirtier battles as AG, staring down corruption with a prosecutor's grit, but this was personal. Langston and Grayson weren't just after her wallet, they wanted her head. The room buzzed with murmurs as Mitchell stepped down, leaving the trio locked in a silent war. Pam knew one thing. This was about to get uglier. Pam Bondi stood, her voice steady as she dropped the bomb. I called Daniel Carter to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as a wiry man in a faded municipal jacket shuffled forward. Judge Edward Langston's scowl deepened, but Pam didn't give him a second to interrupt. Carter's the city's enforcement officer who filed the violation report. Let's hear what he has to say. Langston snapped, This is a stunt, Bondi. You don't get to parade clowns in here. Sit down. Judge Sarah Mitchell cut in, her tone iron. She gets her witness, Edward. Swear him in. Now. Carter took the oath, his hands fidgeting. Pam stepped closer, her questions sharp and fast, honed from years grilling witnesses. Like when she'd backed Trump's defense team in the 2020 impeachment, tearing apart shaky claims with surgical precision. Mr. Carter, you signed off on my alleged violation of 17C, true? He nodded, voice low. Yeah, I did. On what evidence? Pam pressed. Photos? Logs? Anything? Carter hesitated, glancing at Langston, then muttered, No evidence. I was told to write it up. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts from the gallery. Pam pounced. Told by who? Carter swallowed hard. Judge Langston. He called me last week. Said to flag you, no questions. Said it was personal. Chaos exploded. Spectators jeered, a clerk dropped her pen, and Langston slammed his gavel so hard it nearly cracked. Lies! This is perjury! Arrest that man! Mitchell's voice sliced through. Belay that. You don't order arrests here, Edward. I do. Carter, keep talking. Pam didn't miss a beat. Personal, huh? What else did he say? Carter's eyes darted, then he spilled it. Said you'd cost him. Something about 14, your AG race, he got cash from a pack that hated you. Clean Tampa now, bragged he'd bury you one day. The gallery roared louder, a mix of boos and curses. Pam's mind clicked. 2014, her re-election as Florida AG, a brutal fight with dirty money flying both ways. She'd won, But enemies like Langston never forgot. She turned to Mitchell, voice calm but lethal. "That's motive, Your Honor. Langston fabricated this case. Carter's the proof." Michael Grayson leapt up, shouting over the din. "He's a liar. Carter's a drunk. Fired twice for screwing up reports. She's coached him to smear us." Pam spun on him. "Coached? I don't need to coach the truth, Grayson. You're the one scrambling. Where's your evidence?" "Oh, right. Langston made it up." Langston's face went purple, his voice a bellow. "You're a fraud, Bondi. This is a circus. I'm calling a recess." Mitchell slammed her hand down. "No recess. You don't run now, Edward. Sit and face this. Carter, you're under oath. Any proof of that PAC claim?" Carter fumbled, pulling a crumpled phone from his pocket. Got a text. Langston saying, "Bondi's done. Clean Tampa's happy. Dated last Tuesday." The crowd lost at yells, a woman shouting, "Crook!" Langston lunged forward, snarling, "That's fake. He's framing me. She's framing me. I'll have you all disbarred." Pam kept her cool, her tone cutting. "Disbarred? You're the one texting orders to rig cases. That's not a judge. That's a thug with a gavel." Grayson tried again, desperate. "She's twisting it. Carter's a nobody. Probably paid him with Trump's leftovers. She's the thug here." Pam fired back. "Trump? Stay on topic, Grayson. You're drowning. Carter's got no reason to lie, but you and Langston... Revenge is a hell of a drug." Mitchell raised a hand, silencing the room. "Quiet. All of you. Carter, hand over that phone. Clerk, log it. Edward, explain this." Now, Langston sputtered, his composure cracking. "Explain? I don't have to explain to her, or you. This is my courtroom. She's a snake. Always has been." Mitchell's eyes bored into him. "Your courtroom? Not if you're taking bribes and faking reports. That's felony territory. Talk, or I'm calling an inquiry." Pam seized the moment, her voice ringing. "Inquiry's too kind, Your Honor. This isn't just a fine anymore. It's corruption. I want the whole case tossed and Langston off the bench. He's done." The gallery cheered, but Langston roared back. "Done? You're done, Bondi. I'll appeal this to the state supreme. I've got friends you'll never touch." Pam smirked faintly. "Friends? Like Clean Tampa? Good luck. Their money's dirty, and so are you." Grayson lunged in, voice shrill. "She's bluffing. No proof, just a washed-up flunky and her word. This is a setup." Mitchell snapped, "Sit, Grayson, or you're out. Edward, last chance. Did you push Carter?" Langston's hands shook, his defiance crumbling. He slumped back, voice hoarse. I told him to check her property. That's all. Maybe I leaned on him. Mistake, fine, but I didn't take cash." The admission hit like a grenade, half truth, half lie. Pam pressed harder. "Mistake? You leaned on him to frame me. Texts don't lie, Edward. Keep digging that hole." Mitchell's tone turned frigid. "He's dug enough." Case paused. "I'm ordering a review of every ruling you've touched this year, Edward. Bondi, you've got your shot. File it formal. We're done here." Langston stared, wild-eyed. "Review? You can't. This is my court." "Not anymore," Mitchell said, standing. "Court's adjourned. Clean up your mess." Pam sat back, her pulse steady but her mind racing. Carter's bombshell had flipped the table, but Langston's half-confession left the fight alive. He wasn't down, he was cornered, and cornered men got nasty. She'd seen it in 2020, defending Trump against a swarm of accusations, turning chaos into wins. This wasn't over. Langston's mistake was a lifeline, and he'd cling to it. The room buzzed as Mitchell exited, leaving Pam facing two snarling foes. She'd drawn blood, but the war was just heating up. Pam Bondi sat poised, her hands resting on her notes, as Judge Sarah Mitchell's voice rang out. "This court orders an internal review of Judge Langston's conduct effective immediately. Case on hold until we sort this mess." The gallery buzzed, a mix of cheers and grumbles. Pam allowed herself a faint nod. Not a win yet, but close. Langston's empire was cracking, and she'd swung the hammer. She'd walked into this expecting a slap on the wrist. Now she'd turned it into his reckoning. Then Michael Grayson stood, his smirk back like a bad rash. "Hold up, Your Honors. I've got something you'll want to see." He slapped a document on the table, his voice loud and smug. Check this out. Pam Bondi's lobbying contract with Ballard Partners, dated 2021. Guess who they worked for? Coastal Development? The same outfit tied to this property dispute. She never disclosed it. The air shifted, a collective gasp sucking the triumph from the room. Pam's pulse spiked, but her face stayed stone. She knew the gig after leaving Florida AG in 2019. She'd joined Ballard Partners, raking in cash lobbying for big players. Coastal was one of them, a murky real estate firm she'd advised on permits. It wasn't illegal, she'd checked every box, but it was a grenade in Grayson's hands. Langston seized it, his voice a snarl. Well, look who's dirty too. She's been playing us, Mitchell. Her hands are as filthy as she claims mine are. I move to toss this whole farce. Neither of us deserves a ruling. Pam shot back, her tone icy. That's a stretch, Edward. I lobbied, sure, above board, filed with the feds. You? You rigged a case with bribes and threats. Don't equate your slime with my work. Grayson laughed, harsh and grating. Work? You mean cashing checks to grease this exact kind of deal? Coastal's in your pocket. No wonder you fought so hard. Hypocrite! Mitchell raised a hand, her face tight. Enough. Both of you. Bondi, is this true? You consulted for Coastal? Pam met her gaze, unflinching. Yes, Your Honor. 3 years ago, no conflict. I wasn't on this case then. It's irrelevant. Irrelevant, Langston barked. It's a damn scandal. She's tainted. Dump this now, Sarah, or it's a circus for all of us. Mitchell's jaw clenched, her silence heavy. Pam knew that look. Disappointment, not doubt. Mitchell had backed her in 14, but this was a stain. It's not illegal, Mitchell said finally, but it's messy. Too messy. I'm dismissing the case, no ruling, we're done. The gavel fell, a dull thud. No cheers, no jeers, just stunned quiet. Pam gathered her papers, her movements slow, deliberate. She'd dodged the fine, but victory tasted like ash. Langston smirked. Grayson gloated, and she walked out, head high but mind racing. She'd gutted them with Carter's truth, only to have her own past boomerang back. Legal? Yes. Clean? Not quite. Outside, the sun blazed, heat pressing down as she reached the courthouse steps. Her phone buzzed. Trump's aide, voice clipped. Pam, it's on Fox News. Bondi's Coastal cash scandal. They've got the contract, the texts, everything. Boss says handle it fast. She hung up without a word, staring at the glare ahead. The headlines would scream, her Ballard days, her Trump ties, all twisted into a knot of doubt. She'd fought for justice here, exposed Langston's rot, but Grayson's dagger had pierced deeper. Not a loss, not a win, just a draw that left her bleeding in the public square. She'd faced worse, cartel threats, impeachment, firestorms, but this felt different. Personal, raw. Pam stood there, the light harsh on her face, her next move a blank. Would she fight the spin, call Trump's bluff, take the hit, or step back, let the storm pass? No one knew, not Mitchell, not Langston, not even her. She exhaled, sharp and slow, then turned toward the street. The war wasn't over. It had just gone bigger, uglier, and she'd have to pick her ground. For now she walked, a shadow stretching long behind her, silent and unyielding. What lingers from Pam Bondi's courtroom clash isn't the fine or the twist, it's the raw truth that power bends to those who know its rules, not just its titles. Pam walked in expecting a fight, but she learned even victories can turn sour when shadows from the past strike back. The lesson? Strength isn't enough. Vigilance is everything. In life we face our own Langstons and Graysons, bullies hiding behind authority or old grudges, ready to pounce when we least expect it. Knowing the game like Pam did means staying sharp, questioning the surface, and bracing for the unexpected. It's a gritty reminder, trust yourself, but watch your back. Thanks for diving into this tale with me. If it hit you, drop a like, share your thoughts below, and subscribe. There's always more to unpack where power and truth collide.